Welcome to my channel. I want to say that I really appreciate all the people that are subscribing to my channel. I have 207 subscribers now, which is mind blown. That's way beyond what I ever would have thought I would have. I just thought a handful of people would be interested in what I have to say, but it's over 200 now, and I've done nothing to promote it. All the promotion of my channel has been done by the people that come to visit me and share my videos with other people. So I want to thank each and every one of you for subscribing, for liking my videos, for commenting on them, and especially for sharing them, because without you, I wouldn't have 207 subscribers. And I know on a lot of channels that's a tiny amount, but for me, that's amazing. That's just beyond my comprehension. I was planning on making a video today on genealogy, and I will get to that, but something popped across my desk that I just had to share with you because it's so troubling. It's so incredibly troubling. Tucker Carlson interviewed a man who has done a lot of research on the trans issues. And I want you to hear what this man has to say and think about the impact of it.
What I call transgender ink deserves to be highlighted in a very visible way. Why? Sex reassignment surgeries and hormone replacement therapies are a combined value of $2.94 billion. By 2030, would increase to $7.5 billion. There are no long-term studies that show the efficacy of taking these very powerful pharmaceuticals. One of the most graphic and invasive procedures is a vaginoplasty. That is where male to female patient is castrated, testicles are removed, and the penis is inverted to create a vaginal cavity.
They can't even do lip filler in a convincing way in this country. You can't tell me they can recreate something as complex as female genitalia.
The Biden administration has kind of tacitly endorsed reconstructive surgery for minors.
The child will often know that they are transgender from the moment that they have any ability to express themselves.
There's 300,000 transgender youth. That number has, by the way, doubled over 5 years. They face a lifetime of zero sexual function.
It's almost too crazy.
It's perverse.
If someone had told you 15 years ago that kids in your, say, daughter's 9th grade class would be coming to school in drag and would be affirmed in that by their teachers and the broader community, you would say there's no chance that could happen in this country. And of course, it has happened, and it's now happening at scale. Transgenderism is not just a fad, it's a fact of life across this country, not just the elites, but in small towns, everywhere. And so the question is, how did something this unnatural and prima facie demented happen so quickly? Well, of course, there's got to be money involved. Interestingly, no one that we're aware of has taken a close forensic look at where the money's coming from and where it's going. And that's why we're so delighted to see research done by our next guest, Chris Moritz, who's a longtime investment banker and policy guy, has done on this question. Transgenderism. It didn't happen by accident. Some people are profiting from it. And with that, we introduce our guest who joins us here on set. Thank you.
Thank you, Tucker. It's beyond a pleasure to be here.
Well, we're grateful to have you. And there's been a lot of complaining about this. It's clearly a destructive trend that's hurting people, particularly children, destabilizing the society, and it doesn't make any sense. So it's making all of us irrational. But for some reason, nobody has taken the time to figure out who's profiting from this. And you've done what I think is a spectacular dive into this, an amazing overview of the economics of transgenderism. So with that, I'll just kind of back off and let you describe what you found.
Well, I think there's so many elements to this issue.
Yes.
Philosophical, religious even.
Yes. Religious
sociological.
especially.
Of course.
Yeah.
But the economics of it, what I call transgender ink, is something that has gotten very, very little attention, and it deserves to be highlighted in very visible way.
Yes.
Because this is a market that in 2018 This market is made up of sex reassignment surgeries and hormone replacement therapies, which include a number of different pharmaceutical products. But the combined value sales of sex reassignment surgeries and the pharmaceutical products in 2018 was $2.94 billion. By 2022, that figure had rose to $4.18 billion.
So think about that. In 4 years, the amount of money being made on transgender surgery and transgender drugs has almost doubled. If you think about that for just a minute, do you think the number of people that are actually transgender has doubled? All of a sudden, twice as many people think they're transgender as before? Or is there some other factor at work here?
And by 2030, our analysis indicates that would increase to $7.5 billion, which represents an 8.5% compound annual growth rate, which is relatively significant within a healthcare vertical.
Well, it's bigger than the entire healthcare budgets of some African countries. I mean,
sure.
It's a lot of money.
Well, considering also that the population of patients is about 1 million people. There's 1.6 million transgender adults, or I should say over the age of 13, transgender individuals in the United States as of 2022.
1.6 million. The population of the United States is almost 340,500,000. 1.6 million people represents about 1/2 of 1% of the population. That's what we're talking about. And yet, you're surrounded by talk about transgender constantly. You're hearing about transgender rights and transgender this and transgender that. For 0.5%, a tiny minority is making noise like they're almost the majority. And they're bragging about how they're growing their ranks constantly. This ought to really trouble you, that something that small is having that big an impact on our nation.
Now, that number has doubled in 10 years. So in 2011, there were 700,000 transgender Americans over the age of 13. And by 2022, that had risen to 1.6 million. Now,
So you just ended the debate over whether this is something a person is born with.
Well, I think that there is absolutely zero scientific evidence that would suggest that there is a gene, chemical alteration, any kind of somatic, physical, biological element to transgenderism that would result in what has become known as gender dysphoria. And in fact, if we get deeper into the medical research, we find that there are no clinical studies, none, on the long-term efficacy, consequences, and in many cases debilitating life-term effects of these procedures and pharmaceutical products, especially on children.
With their
Okay. There are no, as in zero, clinical studies examining the long-term effects of the surgery or of the drugs that they're using. And yet they're using them. They're doing them over and over again to people. And parents are being sucked into this and convinced that it's the right thing to do with their children. It's insane. It's beyond insane. When COVID came out, the big complaint that we heard was that hydroxychloroquine could not be used to cure COVID because there had been no long-term studies on it. That was the claim. There were no long-term studies, no double-blind placebo clinical trials that proved that hydroxychloroquine would work on COVID. And yet, you don't hear that complaint about all this transgender stuff. You don't hear that complaint about transgender surgery. You don't hear that complaint about transgender drugs. The double standard and the hypocrisy is astounding to me. It's just astounding.
Studies?
There are none. In fact, the FDA has not approved a single pharmaceutical product used in gender transition specifically for gender transition. So testosterone, estrogen, and what are called GnRH agonists or puberty blockers are all prescribed off-label.
Do you know what off-label is? Basically, what off-label means is that the drug that you're using or that you're being prescribed has not been approved by the FDA for that use. It may have been approved for something else, but it was not approved for that use. That was the case with hydroxychloroquine. It was being used off-label to treat COVID because they had not done any long-term studies. But off-label drugs are prescribed all the time with no complaints or no troubles raised about it, no protests from anyone. Off-label use is prevalent throughout the society and throughout the healthcare community. Unless, of course, it's something that goes against the elite's desire to destroy our nation. So you couldn't use off-label hydroxychloroquine because, oh no, we couldn't have COVID being cured by a cheap drug when we had all these expensive vaccines that we needed to have. And you can use off-label drugs to treat a child with chemicals that there have been zero studies on to see what the long-term effects are, and to double the population of transgender people so that now it's 0.5%. 0.5% of our population. And they talk about this as if they're being compassionate. Compassionate? Are you serious? It's compassionate to give someone a drug when you don't know what the long-term effects will be? Have you ever heard of thalidomide? Was that compassionate? What is wrong with these people? I know what's wrong. It's the devil. It's Satan working in the world and damn fool human beings being sucked into it, not even thinking through the consequences. What happens to your little child when you pump them full of drugs that alter their chemistry? Oh, you don't know? Oh, but you're willing to do it anyway? That's child abuse. That is child abuse, plain and simple.
They do not have specific FDA approval for gender transition because this is such a new field of medicine, and many of these drugs, especially these GnRH agonists or puberty blockers, have been traditionally prescribed for cancer patients.
Right.
And
prostate cancer, famously.
Exactly. So there's a drug called Lupron developed by AbbVie Pharmaceuticals, and this has gotten a lot of controversy and a lot of attention because in Texas, Ken Paxton has actually brought a suit against AbbVie and another pharmaceutical company that makes puberty blockers called Endo Pharmaceuticals, based on the fact that they are advertising to children these drugs off-label
for a non-FDA approved use.
Correct.
So,
I mean, the hypocrisy, the absolute, utter, disgusting hypocrisy just blows my mind. Can we advertise cigarettes to children? Oh no, that's not permitted. No, because we know the effects of cigarettes are bad. But we can advertise drugs that will alter that child's chemistry, that will alter that child's life permanently, and we don't even know what the long-term effects will be, but we can advertise that to children. Really. The double standard, the disgusting hypocrisy, and the absolute evil of the transgender, whatever you want to call it, the transgenderism movement is disgusting. And what's behind it? Lots and lots and lots and lots of money being made by unprincipled scientific people, unprincipled physicians, and unprincipled politicians.
Testosterone feeds prostate tumors.
Yes.
So if you are diagnosed with prostate cancer, one of the therapies might be to lower your testosterone, correct?
Correct.
That's what this drug is used
That's
for.
exactly right.
But it's now being prescribed at scale to kids.
Yeah.
And there's no study suggesting the outcomes long-term?
None. No peer-reviewed study.
Can you think of is there any other part of, air quotes, medicine where over 1 million people are being prescribed a course of, quote, therapy where we don't know the outcome?
Yeah, I think there is an analogy that can be made. As a millennial growing up in the 90s, what was a big trend at that time in for that cohort? ADHD.
Yeah.
Everyone was put on Adderall at a young age because school teachers identified hyperactive kids, and the process of going from being identified as maybe a little different or whatever at the school level, and then getting elevated to guidance counselors, then to psychologists, then to clinicians, and before you know it, you're prescribed a very powerful pharmaceutical drug. And I think something very similar.
An addictive drug that'll give you brain damage.
For sure. And I'll tell you that drugs that are being administered for transgender patients, especially these puberty blockers, are far more dire.
Can we just back up
Yeah,
for
of course.
1 second? So, and I remember that very well. I had kids in school at the time. The ADHD thing happened. And I always thought it was a cope for, boring teachers teaching pointless material, and when kids got jumpy, they're like, you need drugs.
Right.
But I always assumed there was some sort of longitudinal research on the effects of this, and there was.
Well, at the time, at that time, it was still kind of a novel, a novel therapy, and really gained, enormous amount of traction in the 90s. And I think what we're seeing.
But they had no data to show that this would improve long-term outcomes.
I can't say whether there were peer-reviewed studies at the time. I believe that even today we don't know the long-term consequences necessarily of some of those specific drugs, but certainly with respect to the transgender pharmaceuticals, there are no long-term studies peer-reviewed that show the efficacy or not of taking these very powerful pharmaceuticals. And we may not know for some time. And in fact, has resulted in, this has resulted in a situation where clinicians and institutions and academics and elementary schools and the entire gamut of this supply chain have to fall back on protocols established by an organization called WPATH. WPATH stands for the World Professional Association of Transgender Health. It's technically a medical professional body established in the 1970s. But I think what's unique about it is that it is for sure, a medical entity, but it is also an advocacy organization. And
a political advocacy organization.
For sure. So insofar as they are advocating for the advancement of transgenderism. So, in other words, the protocols and clinical protocols that health systems, large and small, are falling back on are the standards that WPATH it has enacted over the years.
So can I ask you a question?
Look, I'm not going to make you listen to this whole thing. I strongly suggest that you do. But it's not my point to make you listen to the whole thing. I just want you to understand this entire movement of transgenderism is evil. It's backed by the pharmaceutical companies, who we all know control our Congress. And if you look in the Bible and you study the Bible in Greek, the word for pharmaceuticals is pharmacopoeia. That's the Greek word. And it's always in the Bible associated with the devil. Now, I know there are drugs that are very beneficial for people. There's no question about that. But there are lots of drugs that are not beneficial and have more harmful side effects than the benefits that they provide. When COVID hit, I asked my doctor if she would prescribe me hydroxychloroquine if I got ill with COVID, which I have never done. And she said, no, it's not permitted. I knew right then and there that my doctor was not concerned about my health. She was concerned about her financial and career health. I lost all what little faith I had left in the medical profession during the COVID crisis because they fell in line with the pharmaceutical companies from the get-go, with some rare exceptions like Dr. Zelenko. And now they're falling in line with an organization that is promoting transgenderism, and they're falling in line with them to follow the path and the protocols that that organization is providing for them. It's insane. It's beyond comprehension that this could happen. Doctors are supposed to, first of all, do no harm. Do no harm. That's the Hippocratic Oath. But nowadays, doctors are just, many of them, an arm of the pharmaceutical companies. They're a way to get the drugs out to the public. And we're barraged on television with ads for drugs. And then they, in very low tones, hushed tones, with hyper speed, spit out all of the side effects, which in many cases are absolutely appalling. I don't take drugs unless I absolutely have to. I refuse to take any drugs that I don't know what they are. I would not and will not and never would get an mRNA vaccine. I don't care how much they demand it. If they insist on it, I'll shoot myself before I'll take it. I'm just not going to subject my body to that kind of evil. If you have children, you need to think about these issues very carefully, and you need to fight for what's right for your kids. And what's not right for your kids is transgenderism. Altering their bodies with chemicals and surgically removing parts of their body so that they are no longer able to have children for the rest of their lives is evil. It is absolute, pure evil. I understand how we got here, okay? I understand it. I mean, I know that the devil works in this world. He has very nefarious ways. Many people are sucked in by him, and many people are working for him. I understand that. But what I don't understand is how you, as an American, can look at these things and say, well, you know, I wouldn't do it, but it's okay for Joe. Or I wouldn't do it, but it's okay for Sam and Mary's daughter, Linda. Come on, man. You should be telling them this is wrong. And if they disagree with you, that's fine. If they want to fight you, that's fine. Just go away. Don't talk to them anymore. But don't stand idly by while millions of children are being abused and say, It's not my problem. It is your problem. It's all of our problems. I don't know what else to say. I just pray to God that the people in this country wake up. I really do. And I pray that you will prosper, that God will keep you safe, and that He will give you health and a long life. And I pray that you'll be anxious for nothing, but in all things with prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, you will let your request be made known to God, and the peace that passes all understanding will keep your heart and mind in Christ Jesus. This is the Vietnam Era Vet out.